Thank you all again for joining. I'm going to hand it over to Marta Dabis, who is a Dharma-transmitted priest and a member of the SCBA and has worked with Rakugo for some time to do our introduction. Thank you, Marta.
Thank you very much. And please allow me to offer a wholehearted welcome to Rakugo. We are so glad that you're going to lead this workshop today. I met Rakugo through the Soto Zen Buddhist Association, and we attended a conference together. That's when we first time met in the flesh after a long time of meeting on Zoom. And it turned out that we are both very interested in how come sanghas are generally not very interested in talking about Zen and sexuality. And lo and behold, it turns out that Rakugo has a master's degree in the education of sexuality, human sexuality education, and on top of her PhD in literature. So, as a professor, she teaches English and gender, women, and sexuality studies at Widener University, and she began her formal Zen studies in 2011 with Shugen Roshi, Reverend Shuzen Harris Roshi at Soji Zen Center, and where she continues to serve. So today's workshop emerges from years of commitment to both Dharma and critical inquiry. Reverend Castaldo, Rakugo, brings compassion, curiosity, and clarity to the complex intersection of sexuality, ethics, and spiritual life. Her work invites us to explore these topics not from a place of avoidance, but with full presence, care, and integrity. May I even mention joy? Please join me in welcoming Reverend Rakugo Castaldo.
Thank you so much. That introduction really made me sound much more impressive than I actually am. But I will say that I have long been interested in the ways that sexuality is treated in this very paradoxical, complex way in modern culture. So, despite the fact that I'm an early modern scholar, I have a PowerPoint and I'm going to share it. And then I'll bop back and forth as so that I can see more people as they come in. But let's see. So, start. Yay. Okay. First of all, I want to talk about what this workshop is. But first, most important, what it is not. Because most of the time, when there is some sort of religion and sexuality workshop, it's about how not to get in trouble, especially with student-teacher relationships. This is, of course, incredibly important, but I am in no way going to address it because it's addressed many, many places. I also want to make clear that this is not about rejecting or endorsing any specific form of sexuality. I myself, for example, am polyamorous, but this is not going to be a workshop on how everyone needs to have more than one partner or any partners. So that's what this workshop is not. So what is it? Why are you not working? Hey. Okay, that worked. There we go. So first, I'd like to explore terms that are used by human sexuality educators. I think it's obviously a very rich, complex field, but I want to just talk about some basic terms, which may or may not be known to those who are here from the Zen side of things, because it gives us a way of thinking about sexuality that is a little more grounded in theory and a sex positive perspective than often is true. The heart of this workshop is really why, in fact, are we so uncomfortable talking about sex in a religious context? And then I want to look at some specific texts that I will argue are engaged with sexuality. Some of that will be obvious, some not so much. And we probably will not get to the fourth topic, just because it's not, my ideas are going to take up more time than that. If we have time, great. If not, question and answer. All right, so we've already gone through all of this. The only thing I want to mention is that I also have a chronic illness, which is rheumatoid arthritis. And I say this because I want everyone to know that I completely support you doing whatever you need to take care of yourself in the next 2 hours. If you need to turn off your camera or go for a walk or whatever, please do, even if we haven't gotten to the break yet. I'm the only one who has to stay until the break. All right. So first, let's talk a little bit of sex ed vocabulary. So before I talk about these, and I'm just, how can I do this? I'm going to unshare so that I can see everyone. So if you would just, well, now you're all little. If you would just raise your hands or use the little hand signal if these terms are familiar to you. If you feel you could define sex and versus gender, how comfortable do you feel? All right, so some people are raising their hands, some are not. Okay, what about cis versus trans? Okay, good. And then what about sex negative? That slide says next sex negative versus sex negative, but it should say sex negative versus sex positive. Do people feel like they could define the difference? All right, seeing fewer hands, still seeing some. And then have any of you heard of the circles of sexuality as a theoretical concept? Okay, Anna's raising her hand. And then finally, how many of you have heard of the charmed circle of sexuality? All right, so we have a huge range here. Great. So I will start off by going back into the share. Get these terms up so that we can all look at them. Whoops. Okay, so, and remember, this is supposed to say sex negative versus sex positive. So does anyone care to unmute and define sex versus gender, how these two things are different? Or should I take on that? All right, I will go for it then. So what's important to understand here, there are, of course, many, many overlaps and many differences. What's important here is to understand that sex is both a description of the physical body and of an act, leaving aside the act, because we could spend the whole 2 hours just talking about what having sex is, really. We're not going to do that. We could. But so sex is the biological state that people are sorted into. Generally, we think that there are two categories, male and female. There are, of course, other categories. But the idea here is this is the embodied state of your biological form. That, you know, if you're a male, you have, or a man, you have prostate and you have a penis. And if you're a female or a woman, you have a vulva and a vagina, and so on and so forth. It gets way more complicated than that. And if anyone is interested in how, we can talk about it during the question and answer session. Gender is the social performance of one's sex. So gender is made up. Gender is what a society decides counts, you know, so crying is feminine and hitting people is masculine, wearing pink and frills is feminine, and wearing black and heavy, rough fabric is masculine, etc., etc. Cis versus trans, these are two words that define how a person's sense of self relates to their what we call AFAB and AMAB, assigned female at birth, assigned male at birth. So normally you get your sex assigned when the doctor pulls you out and says, it's a boy, it's a girl, by looking at the physical characteristics. Not everyone has an identity that matches that. So cis simply means that your sense of yourself and your sex aligns with the way in which society sees you. So I am have the body of a woman, and I'm perfectly happy being a woman, so I am cis. Trans is when your sense of self does not match the sex you've been assigned at birth and the way society wants you to be. And this is, again, another, I've taken an entire course on trans issues and definitions and explored many, many things. So it's hard for me to keep this short, but I will. So those are just some basic terms. Sex negative versus sex positive. This seems like it should be obvious, but I will add that it's a little more complicated than that. To be sex negative does not mean that you are against sex. It means that you have a limited view of what counts as the right kind of sex. That their sex gets sorted into ethical, moral, godly, appropriate, and immoral, unethical, ungodly, and inappropriate. And it doesn't matter if the sex in the category of yes is very large. If there's stuff that is like, no, this is bad, then it's sex negative. As long as the things in the sex's bad side are not harmful to others. So obviously, rape is not going to be seen positively by anyone, and it should not be. I'm talking more about types of sex that are mutually consented to, etc. So sex positive is completely supportive of someone deciding that they don't ever want to have sex, or that they want to have sex only within the bounds of marriage. It's not about who has the most sex or who is the most excited about sexuality. It's simply, are there limits? Are there controls over what is considered acceptable and not? All right. So there are two, I think, really interesting and exciting ways of thinking about sexuality that I learned from the human sexuality programs. The first is the circles of sexuality. This is an idea that when we think about sex, we tend to think of some body part connecting to some other body part, but there's so much more than that. So there are 6 circles, ignoring the one in the middle for the moment. And we don't have time to go over these, but you can see in this one here, there are sort of some definitions. So there's sensuality, there's intimacy, right? Sharing and vulnerability and trust. There's sex orientation and gender identity, things we just talked about. Sexual and reproductive health, knowing how your sexual or systems work, taking care of them, using appropriate birth control, all of the elements that go into producing a healthy baby. And then sexual behaviors and practices are only one of the 6. And actually, if you look, this says sexual behaviors and practice. More normally, the circles talk about this as sexualization. It's the only negative circle. Sexualization, it can be okay. It can be a flirting or media messages, but it's usually about making someone objectified or lacking in agency. Before I move on with my question, is anyone unclear about sort of how the circles work, and would you like me to say more? Okay, so, and I can only see about 6 of you, so you just have to hit the raise hand button and then you hopped at the top. You probably already know this. We've all done Zoom so many times, but if you do have a question, please hit that little raise hand and I'll be happy to hear from you or talk to you. So these 2 sets are mostly the same. As I said, this is sexualization and this is just sexual behaviors, but there's one big difference. In the center here, it says power and agency. And in the center here, it says values. So there are 2 different ways of looking at how the circles are all connected to each other. And I'd love to hear from 2 or 3 people about the difference for you between power and agency in sex and values. Are these the same to you? Are they different? If they are different, how? So, and I'm going to stare at you until someone talks. And I believe you have the power to unmute yourself, so just go ahead. Anshin, please. Oh, you muted yourself again.
Apologies, thank you. Yeah, so I might have a value to not cause harm, and I might express that through negotiating power, or through negotiating agency in sex and sexuality.
Fabulous. So if I can restate, am I understanding you correctly? Values underlie the way in which you use power and agency.
Yeah, thanks.
Awesome. Okay, I saw Koku's hand. Do you want to go next?
Well, I was just testing it. But yeah, I was going to say a similar thing, that it does feel different but related. The values are, the kind of what I wish to do with all of those things, and the power and agency give me the ability to kind of put the values into practice.
Yeah, wonderful. Thank you. Does anyone else want to? I said 2 or 3, so if anyone else wants to go, great.
So my practice is centered around, or sexual practice centered around, like BDSM dynamics. So it's fairly direct, like safe words, using the back and forth negotiation, ask what you want, conveying, hey, this is cool, that's not cool. And so it's completely foundational. Without that, it's just not fun for anybody.
Yes, I've also been part of the BDSM community, and it's true. People on the outside tend to think that it has less worry about people's agency. It's actually way more. Communication is such an important part of the kink scene, and because the things people are doing can easily endanger someone. So there's lots of other reasons too, but I think that's one of them. All right. There's no right answer that I'm looking for here. I was just interested in the people's responses to these 2 versions. And I will, if left to my own devices, talk forever about each slide. So I'm going to move on. So the second slide, oh, that is a terrible picture, but it gives you the basics. So Gail Rubens came up with this idea that there's what is called a charmed circle of sexuality. So on the inside, you'll see things like, if you can read this, no pornography, at home, coupled, free, and these are all things that make the sex acceptable to society. And then on the outside, so example, sex for free, 2 people coming together to have sex versus one paying the other. That is seen as outside the circle. Some of these things, this was created quite a while ago. Some of these things are less of an issue now. Procreation, for example, I think there's a much greater acceptance of sex for fun now than there was when Gail created this. But I think there are still some, so vanilla S&M, I think still a lot of people are a little uncomfortable with that. I think that there's greater acceptance of homosexuality, but it's still not the same level as heterosexuality. And of course, my favorite, rather than at home, in the park, which should, if you know your gay rights history, you know that parks where a lot of gay men met for sex when it was still illegal to have sex with another, someone of the same gender. So I bring this up because I think it's important that we think about sexuality in relation to spirituality, that 2 things. A lot of people's understanding of what counts as quote unquote the proper or charmed circle sex comes from religion, whether they realize it or not. And B, that if we, as people who are interested in spirituality and sex, don't kind of uncover our own biases, our own sort of knee-jerk reactions to things, then we can do more harm than good. All right. Before I move on, that was part one. At the end of part two, there'll be a longer break, but does anyone have any questions right now? Okay, so this title slide is not a typo. It's talking about sex. It's talking about why the conversations around sex tend to be brief or uncomfortable or missing. So let me bop out of this for a moment. I would like to ask people to again raise your hands. So how many? So wait, I have these written down so they'll make sense. All right, so I have a couple of questions. How many Dharma talks have you given or heard that are completely or mostly about a sexual topic? If you would just type into the general chat a number ranging from 0 to hopefully a north, just interested to see. So Dharma talks you've given, Dharma talks you've heard that are mainly about sex. Oh, look. Oh, you've heard. Okay, that's great. So notice the vast majority of people are answering 0. And I'm going to assume that the people who are answering 0 are not in their first year of practice. There are a few that are longer, 10 to 20, which is amazing. 5 over 50 years, which is still not bad. Sexual misconduct only, yeah. So thought number 1, we don't talk about this. Same question, but now leaving aside this workshop, how many of you have been to a workshop or what were the other things? Workshop or study group or the like? How many of you have had the topic of sex come up in a study text, study group, workshop, aside from this one? Dokusan. Just type that into the chat. 0, 1, 26 every day. Okay, I'm seeing some references about precepts. We're going to talk about precepts, of course. Queer specific sanghas, yes. Oh, interesting. Maybe briefly before a retreat, like don't do it, I'm assuming. It's great that there are people who are able, a lot of people are able to answer yes. And much what this indicates, totally expected, is that although there is still some discomfort, we are more comfortable talking about sex in a sort of longer form, free ranging back and forth about a topic than a Dharma talk where it seems maybe like it shouldn't be discussed, or maybe it should, but we're not sure how. All right. So what these couple of polls have demonstrated is, I think, totally what I expected, and I hope undeniable to you, that there is a lack of comfort around talking about sex and a sort of sense that it's better to leave sex out of the zendo. And I have some problems with that we'll get into in a minute. Before I move on with a few texts, some sutras and things, love to hear some comments from people, either about, well, actually, wait a minute. Why is this not working? Yeah. So why is it so hard to talk about sex? We're going to do two small group. Sorry, I got out of line in the order of things I was doing. So we're going to do two breakout rooms. The first one will be now. And then after the break, we'll talk more. So this is for you and a small group of people to answer these questions. Do you personally feel discomfort talking about sex, specifically in a religious context? Although if you also wanted to talk about other places you feel reluctant to talk about sex, that's great. Whether or not you personally feel discomfort, lacking comfort. How often does your sangha or congregation or group or whatever address this topic of sex formally as part of teaching? If it is addressed, how is it presented? Is it positive, negative? Is it about don't do these things, this is bad, or is it more balanced? And then third, if there is discomfort about talking about sex, what do you think causes it? Or if you don't have any discomfort, what do you think causes it in other people? So there are questions about the breakout rooms. We'll give everyone about 10 minutes to discuss, and then we'll call you all back. Please do, as a first step, introduce yourselves to each other. Say hello, maybe identify your sangha or what brought you here if you're not here as a Zen person. And I'm not sure if there are non-Zen people here, but who knows. And then if you wouldn't mind sort of designating someone to just take a few notes so that people can report out some of the findings. Questions, comments? All right, whenever you're ready, Keegan. So first I want to acknowledge that with 5 people in a room, there is no way all of you got to say everything you wanted to. And this is really the start of a conversation, I hope, and not the end. But I'd love to hear a few points that came up and seemed interesting to people. There were 5 groups, so 5 people would be wonderful. Sakure.
Thank you, Rakugo. Yeah, I raised my hand because I felt like in our group we had a pretty good range, a pretty good span. I know that I haven't had much to say since the beginning of this workshop because the truth is I'm learning a lot. I don't know a lot of it. I've never heard of the circles that are discussed before, so it's a lot of learning. Some people in our group mentioned that like it doesn't, anything discussing sex or sexuality, even in relation to the Dharma, in relation to religion, doesn't always seem to be a topic that just naturally comes up. And so there was no reason necessarily, or maybe there hasn't been a reason for anyone to feel like they need to talk about it. Whereas on the other hand, someone else in our group did have a situation with a teacher who developed a relationship with a student and then tried to have an open discussion with the Sangha. And some people took to it and some people did not. And it was just very interesting.
Yeah, as an educator myself, of course, I have very strict views about student-teacher relationships. But it's interesting to me that the teacher felt that the way around this was to go for Sangha approval. Jintai.
Hi, we didn't really have a dedicated note taker, so I'm just going to speak with what I remember from my group saying. There were a couple of themes that came up that I found interesting. The first is that some groups still have a celibacy requirement to be ordained as a priest. I think there is some historical background for that that has mostly fallen away, but some groups still have that. And there's obvious implications there for, well, oh, if the priests need to be celibate, then that must be the best way, right?
Yeah.
So that was one element we talked about. And the other, which I wanted to dive into more where we ran out of time, was how sexuality closely couples with desire. And it's a very desirous act, and a lot of people wrap up their kind of self worth and their self identity into it. And we're trying with Zen to drop off the kind of ego. And so that's where it can, for me, be a little bit uncomfortable to kind of walk that fine line.
Yeah, I wanted to spend a whole section talking about desire and attachment in relation to sex and sexuality. And I don't think there's going to be time for that. But I'm open to a workshop part 2. So we'll see. Adriana.
It's Adrian, and
Oh, sorry.
no worries. And we didn't have a note taker, so I'm going to try to go with what I remember, and also some things we said at the end. Most of us, for one of your first questions, we were comfortable talking about sex, but also trying to also keep in mind that some people have histories and things can be triggered, and so that's one of the main reasons people have any discomfort. But personally, most of the people in the group were comfortable. And at the end, I said something that I felt like most of the discussions about sex in the Dharma talks or in the Zendo were about people asking questions about what the right thing to do is. It was kind of, it's not, and that's not from the teachers, that's the questioners asking that question. But then what you were saying about sex positive and sex never, it kind of frames it as like, this is what, they're asking, what's the right thing to do? What's the parameters? Also, there were many groups that before COVID met at our temple space from different lineages of Buddhism. And sometimes it's a lay community. So sometimes I remember one person saying, I was out at the club last night and now I'm in the Zendo this morning, so just how does that work? And so just, I wish there was a way to incorporate more of those questions of being in lay life and also, more of a neutral framework. So it's not always like, even if they say leave it up to yourself, people are still wanting an answer. What's the right thing to do?
Yeah, that's such an interesting point, and I just want to add one thing to that, which is we don't really do this with anything else. It's not like someone says, like, oh, I went out and had a 5-course meal, and now I'm at the Zendo. How do I reconcile those things? I mean, obviously, drugs, alcohol, but there's this whole category of pleasurable things that don't seem to have any value outside of or necessity outside of the pleasure that people get a little squirrely about. So that's 3 groups. Are people in the other 2 groups? Is there anyone who would like to volunteer? No one wants to volunteer to share.
Well, I just want to make one point that people were taught their back and home cultures in relation to talking about sex. So whether sex is considered private or moral or immoral or recreational or necessary or whatever, just all of those values discussions have everything in the world to do with how a person was brought up and what the culture of identification is. So that was one thing that stood out, and maybe other people in my group could say more things that stood out.
And I really appreciate you bringing that forward. Sexuality and sex specifically have such strong boundaries, cultural, familial, whatever, that it's really hard to let go of those and to see letting go of them as even optional. making your own individual choice. As Adrian said, the students are saying, what's the right thing here? As if there's an external, always correct answer to some really nuanced, complicated problem. Vin, I saw your hand up. I don't know if that was an accident or you wanted to go next.
Actually, it was not an accident.
Good.
But I was just because we didn't get much time. Actually, we forgot the questions completely, so we just remember the context. So we talked about it, and one of the thing is come up, and everyone says that there is this dogma and fear around the people and even the clergy to how to handle it, and does we are equipped with it, because there is all kind of, not just dogma is related to it, but it is also the problem is that there is legal consequences. People accuse, people get attached, even as a teacher, even as a practitioner. There's difference between practitioner and teacher. And one of the questions you asked before, that how many of us got into the lectures about the sex, and one of these things also that, do you really, are people comfortable going into the lecture which is talking about the sex? Because people still think it is very, very private thing and it should be dealt with a very private way. But it is still, there is this limit. I feel all the time that the talk not just become all about sex. It is a part of life. It have to be dealt. Some people are dealing for some period of time, and it should be dealt and kept in that way only. But because people have a desire, and sexual desire is one of the most important desire of human lives. It is impossible to get away. As priests, myself is different for me, or some people have different angles to it. So there is still this thing, what is the right way to approach it? Because as being in the Zen center and being a friend to lots of young people, they talk to me very freely about it because they know they can talk to me about. And when from couple of weeks, I'm saying, oh, not today, I'm avoiding, and there is I'd say that, oh, go and talk to your teacher. I say, no, I don't want to talk to it. It is really, they don't want to talk to teacher. They think it's not a good idea at all. So that's the whole thing, I think so. Thank you.
That was wonderful, and you had so much there. And I want to fully acknowledge that for a lot of people, sexuality is private. And there are a whole bunch of private things like going to the bathroom that we don't tend to give Dharma talks on. And so it's not so much, it's more just that sex as the circles of sexuality. And this is one of the reasons why I wanted to include that slide. Sex sort of is part of our lives these days, whether it's using sex and sexual attraction to sell things, whether it's about the clothes we wear. There's a lot of push to bring sex into the public and not just leave it private. And so we have to deal with it on both levels. All right, so there's now going to be a 10-minute break. I will have one slide left over from this section that I want to talk about, and then we'll move on. But please go forth last few seconds, and we will start again. So welcome back, everyone. I hope that the break was a little refreshing for you. It certainly was for me. So before we move on to the third part of this workshop, I could easily cut this, but I just want to talk about it. So sorry, I'm going to go ahead. So, whoops, that's not. Share. So one of the problems with bringing discussions of sexuality into our zendos. Okay, yeah, go away. Is that we have very Okay, there we go. Is that we have very few examples of Zen teachers doing this. Sorry. Evidently my break was too relaxing. There we go. So I don't know how many of you are familiar with Brad Warner or his book, Sex, Sin, and Zen. I could say a lot about him that I won't. I don't find him to be especially supportive or useful in what he says. But the reason I want to talk about this cover is this is one of the few books that sort of directly engages with sexuality. And so, first of all, in the book, if you haven't read it, he starts out trying to present sexuality in a very positive way and as part of a practice. But when he starts talking about polyamory, BDSM, sex work, he becomes very moralistic and without being nuanced at all, rejects these types of sexuality across the board. There is no positive way to be a sex worker, for example. It's always harmful. It's never skillful. And so what does he consider positive? Well, we have this cover, and what you see is 5 women in various states of undress who are all in some way or other conventionally attractive. We have this sort of geisha stereotype. We have a large-chested blonde with a sexual expression, so on and so forth. And then in the back, we've got a guy wearing a teacher's robe and kesa, grinning. This is the male gaze. This is a way of saying sex is for male enjoyment. Women are objects to be admired, and that none of these women are practitioners, as far as we can guess. I mean, if he's there wearing a robe and they're wearing lingerie, the assumption has to be that they're not practitioners. And so I just wanted to offer this cover as an example of the ways in which even people who are trying to talk about sex in a positive way mess up. All right, skipping that. So I wanted to now look into some of the ways in which Buddhism in general, and then of course specifically Zen, since that's what we're mostly part of, say about sex. So first of all, if you look at original Buddhism and the early texts, you will find a lot of very sex negative language. Just as an example, it would be better for you, foolish man, that your male organ should enter a mouth of a terrible and poisonous snake than it should enter a woman. And then, as another example, there is this: if a bhikkhu engages in the impure conduct of sexual intercourse, even with an animal, that bhikkhu commits parajika and is expelled. So there are these specific, in original Buddhism, some 4 sins that are bad enough to get you expelled from the Sangha, and having sex is one of them. And then there are many other examples. If any of you have seen the collection of Coming Home stories about home leaving, you will find the whole list of several hundred rules that the original Buddhism sort of took on board, and a lot of them are about the way to behave with your body, whether it's talking about sexuality or how you dress or how you move. It's all about being very modest and restrained. So for much of Buddhism's history, the ideal, and in some cases the only type of practitioner, is the celibate monk. First in India, monks who wandered individually and traded their teaching for food and shelter, and then came together during the rainy period, and then later on in places like China and Japan, where wandering ascetics were not sort of culturally acceptable, there became monasteries. And in that point, if we look at sex in original Buddhism as it was sort of laid out in the Pali Canon, was like all other desires, a danger and a trap. It was a way that people got stuck in attachment to the world and therefore let them or kept them from the path towards arhatship and then eventual nirvana. What I think is really interesting is that when Buddhism moved into China and Japan, and a little before that, obviously, I'm simplifying the history here amazingly, but the development of the Mahayana branch of Buddhism, which would eventually end up in Japan as Zen, doesn't necessarily present sexuality as something that's especially dangerous for a couple reasons. And if anyone wants to add other reasons when I'm done, please do. But first of all, I think that the shift from a individual achieving nirvana through dedicated study that really removes them from the world to the bodhisattva as the ideal, someone who puts off their own nirvana, trip to nirvana, in order to help others. That shift really brings the practitioners, the teachers, and the priests and the monks back into the world. Even those who are living in monasteries are practicing for other people as well as themselves. And then second, originally, Buddhism was sort of constructed around this idea that people needed to work very hard, possibly over multiple lifetimes, to kind of become arhats, to reach a level where they are capable of enlightenment, that this was rare, it was difficult, and it often took multiple lifetimes. The Mahayana view is that everyone has Buddha nature. Everyone can be enlightened at any moment. And that, of course, is really such a radical shift from the idea that if you have any attachments or you make one slip up, it's like back to the beginning. It's a much more open and sort of engaged view of being in the world, being with a body, and being with attachments, which is really the issue, right? It's mentioned once before now, but, sex is about desire. And desire in Buddhism is problematic, or if not entirely problematic, the attachment to desire is problematic. And I'll just pause here and see if anyone wants to toss out anything about this before we look at some specific examples. All right. So first of all, I assume a lot of you know Vimalakirti, but I will just briefly mention that this is, I'm using the translation by Robert Thurman, The Holy Teaching of Vimalakirti. Vimalakirti is a lay practitioner, but so advanced that he can put all of the bodhisattvas that are working directly with the Buddha to shame in terms of making his arguments and explaining the importance of certain religious traditions or behaviors. And so it describes here how, he looks like and acts like a layman. He lived at home, but remained aloof from the realm of desire, the realm of matter, and the immaterial realm. He had a son, a wife, and female attendants, yet always maintained continence, so on and so forth. And then later it says, to demonstrate the evils of desire, he even entered the brothels. Now, that might seem like an odd thing for me to claim as a positive view of sex, that I would put that in here, but I want to point out two things. One is, Vimalakirti has a son, and therefore he must have had sex at least once. And I think it's interesting also that the text mentions female attendants, not just male attendants or attendants in general. But the point is that at some point, Vimalakirti did have sexual relations with his wife. maybe more than once. Maybe they have an ongoing relationship. Continence does not necessarily mean celibacy. It just means restraint. And so here is this incredibly advanced practitioner, who makes clear that it is possible to live a fully lay life without losing your awareness or your enlightenment. And second, when it says he even entered the brothels. Now, I don't think we're meant to imagine that Vimalakirti had sex with anyone in the brothels, but nothing is off limits for him. He will go into the cabarets to talk to drunk people. He will go to the brothels to talk to, it's not clear, maybe the people working there, maybe the people coming to pay for sex. He goes to schools, and then the quote goes on much longer than here. Vimalakirti finds nothing so problematic that it ruins the ability of someone to make progress along the path of enlightenment. I think that's a really important shift from the earlier Buddhist views that you could get expelled from your sangha for having sex once, and that was it. So I think this is a really important text. Then I want to talk about a couple of koans that on the surface appear to have nothing to do with sexuality. But what I want to suggest is that they talk about the way Zen conceives of embodiment and how it relates to enlightenment. So the first is the Gateless Gate, case 21. A monk asked Uman, "What is Buddha?" Uman said, "A shit stick." People familiar with this koan? So if one or two people would like to unmute and just sort of talk about their thoughts about this koan, obviously not giving away the answer, which is probably different for different traditions anyway. But if you've come in about this koan, or if you're just meeting it for the first time here, what's the thought? What is Uman saying when he says Buddha is basically toilet paper? A shit stick is what was used before toilet paper to cleanse oneself. Anshin.
There's nothing that isn't Buddha.
Yes. Anyone else want to add to that, or does that sort of cover it for everyone? So yeah, if nothing is not Buddha, if everything is Buddha, then sex is Buddha, right? And sort of the same point gets made in the, there are several versions of this. I picked the one from the Book of Serenity where it's case 2. Emperor Wu of Ryo asked the great master Bodhidharma, "What is the ultimate meaning of the truth of Buddhism?" Buddha Dharma replied, "Vast emptiness, no holiness." I love this idea. So the emperor, who clearly has sort of hierarchies and goods and bads and appropriate and inappropriate in his mind, is like, okay, there's holy truth in Buddhism, and I want to know what the ultimate truth is. I'm an emperor. I want to skip the line and get straight to the point where I hear from the master what it is that's most important. And Bodhidharma says, vast emptiness. Everything is empty. And of course, we know that here emptiness does not mean void or without meaning. It means that we are so all interconnected and so impermanent that there is nothing separate from anything else. Kaz Sensei talks about, or Roshi Kaz talks about boundlessness instead of emptiness, a translation of the Heart Sutra, this idea that there is no limit. And because of that, as with case 21 above, there's no holiness, because in order for something to be holy, something else has to be impure, right? But there is nothing that's impure, not even poop, right? And so again, both of these koans, and I could have pulled a dozen more, point to this central idea of Zen specifically, that there is nothing outside the circle of the Buddha, nothing that is beyond or unacceptable. It's all part of existence. We are part of it. It is part of us. Indra's net insists that every jewel reflects every other jewel, not just the pretty ones. You know, it's not like there's some jewels out here way in the corner that are only reflecting the like less pretty jewels or the jewels that are kind of cracked. Everything is holy because nothing is holy. And then finally, chapter 39 of the Flower Ornament Sutra is the sort of, I'm blanking on his name. Someone should feel free to jump in and say something, but the young man who goes to see 50 different enlightening people in order to learn how to become a bodhisattva.
It's Sadhana.
Sadhana, thank you. I don't know where that went in my mind, but thank you. And so there's he's sent by each person to see another person. So he comes to see I'm doing so badly with names. He comes to see this beautiful woman whose name I've also forgotten. Again, feel free to jump in and tell everyone because I should know, but I am blanking. This is one of the things that happens when you have a chronic illness. Things go out of your mind and stay there. But anyway, so she explains to Sadhana, I have attained an enlightening liberation called ultimately dispassionate. I accordingly appear in the form of a female of their species of surpassing splendor and perfection. All who come to me with minds full of passion, I teach them so that they can become free of passion. So this enlightening being chooses, again, the assumption being that men are the ones mainly still at this point becoming enlightened, but she chooses to show up as the desires they have. And she's willing even to go to the point, if you look at I won't read this whole passage, but some attain dispassion just by kissing me and achieve an enlightening concentration called contact with the treasure of virtue of all beings. And so here, there is a way it's expressed that there is a way in which the sex itself can be a form of enlightenment, that the desire of passion of sexual passion can be turned into this freedom from passion, getting what you want, and then discovering that it's not really what you wanted. So that was just me going on for quite a long time. So I'm going to pause here for just a second and ask if people have any comments, other texts they want to throw out to think about, anything else they want to say. Feel free to argue with me about my readings, by the way, they're just mine. Koku.
It's not a text so much, but I'm just thinking of the poetry and the life of Ikkyu Sojun, where he and I've heard differently from different Zen people, and clearly and for people who don't know him, he was someone who was made an abbot of his monastery, but he decided not to do that. So he just went, similar to Vimalakirti, he went into the drinking establishments and the brothels. But unlike Vimalakirti, it seems very clear that he very much partook of what was inside both. And some Zen people see him as like a cautionary tale, whereas others see him more alongside what you said about Vimalakirti and the shit stick of showing that Zen there's nothing outside of Zen, and he was continuing to pursue his path even within his trips into the what we'd call maybe the seedier side of life. But
yeah, and obviously there are more and less skillful ways of practicing. I'm not suggesting everyone run off to have sex with sex workers, because that might not be useful for you or the sex worker. Kim.
Yes, I'm struck by how this reminds me of my own experience of dating and being in a relationship in which I will like fall in love with someone, but then only after a little while will I realize like all the unfinished business that this attraction is bringing up. And so it's like it requires that hook of the illusion of perfection that I'm going to encounter for me to get into the weeds of the work that I need to do. And that can be this like engine that drives growth. So that's something that I'm struck by.
Thank you for sharing. That was really wonderful. And I love the way you see the hook of desire not as a problem, but as an engine. What a great word. Thank you. All right, so we're going to move into breakout rooms in a minute. And what I'd like people to talk about is the most sort of obvious place. A lot of people already mentioned it in one of the polls for talking about sex, and that is, of course, the third precept. So what I have here, this would work out much better if I actually shared my screen first. I will try. Okay, here we go. Okay. So I have here a bunch of different versions of the third precept. So San Francisco Zen Center is probably the simplest. I vow not to misuse sexuality. Bodhidharma, self-nature is subtle and mysterious. In the realm of the ungilded Dharma, not creating a veneer of attachment is called the precept of not misusing sex. And I think this word misuse is doing a lot of work here. Dogen describes the three wheels are pure and clear. When you have nothing to desire, you follow the way of all Buddhas. Doesn't actually mention sex at all. I am in the White Plum lineage, so and my teacher studied for a while with John Dido Laurie, so these are the ones I'm familiar with. Zen Mountain Monastery, honor the body, do not misuse sexuality. Zen Peacemaker, encountering all creations with respect and dignity. This is the precept of chaste conduct. And the first definition of chaste is free of sex, but it can also be understood to be restrained and modest around the body. And then my own teacher at Soji Zen Center, Shizen Roshi, chose, I vow to refrain from being greedy. So much broader than sexuality, but still sort of based under that. So here are the prompts. There are two of them, and we'll put them in the chat. What does it mean to misuse sexuality? Is this a cultural thing, an individual thing? How do we know if something is a misuse or not? Is there something intrinsic that makes something always a misuse? And then what version of the precept do you like? And we can also put these various versions in the chat, but I'll also leave the slide up. Just because I think we learn a lot from each other and ourselves when we're asked to choose from all these overlapping but different versions. So are there any questions before we go into breakout rooms? Okay, so you will have more time this time around. I think we can give you 15 minutes. And then if people would be willing to report out, that would be wonderful. Welcome back, everyone. Let me start by saying we are almost out of time. I am happy to stay for like another half hour if people want to talk. But if you do need to leave or you want to leave or whatever, we will be recording all the way through. So the question and answer section can be as full or as brief as people want it to be. All right, so I know there were a lot of breakout rooms and we don't have a lot of time. So I'd just love to hear from, maybe 3 or 4 people to tell us, what you came up with in terms of misuse of sexuality, and if the group had any sort of preference in terms of the third precept. Ben, thank you.
Hello. We kind of agreed on the topic and everything, I think so. Basically, there are some in the last, there was the gray area which we go, because as a principle, I think everyone agrees on it, that misconduct of sexuality, any two adults which are consenting, whatever they're doing is okay. But there are these gray areas where, which I think it comes more into the another precepts than to sexuality, like you're cheating on your partner. It are more to lying and cheating. It comes on that than the safe connect of the sex, because even in the cheating, two adults are in their conscious doing something which is bad, but it's still the two consulting adults which doing it. So I would like to hear your thoughts on that, actually.
On which part exactly? Whether the third precept really is mostly part of other precepts or something else?
No, like the on the purely Buddhist context, because there is no religious dogma around this subject that this is an ethical god, or that it is all okay. But the thing about that, when people come and ask most of the time that, okay, I was cheated by my suppose or husband or another my love interest, now I generally say that, oh, it is more bigger problem than it is just a sexual misconduct of the person, because sexual misconduct still can be forgiven, but there is a trust level which you deny another person, the truth which you deny another person. So we're breaking lots of precepts in that, because in the relationship, sex is a part of it, but it's not whole. So if you're breaking that, and in the life for some desire or temptation, so you're lying to another person, and you're taking his right away in some ways which you have consented to do that. So it goes in that huge subject. I just wanted to say in less words.
I agree very much. I think that in questions of infidelity, where there is monogamy, sort of, or some sort of form of fidelity has been established, then breaking that is A, lying to the person, B, taking away their consent because they don't actually know what you're doing, and it can be in some cases dangerous because to their sexual health, because studies have shown, oddly enough, that people who commit cheating often don't use protection because they want to lie to themselves and say it just happened, I didn't plan it ahead of time, and stopping off to buy condoms would be, would be admitting that they had planned this. So it's a very unskillful use of sexual energy that is very harmful. And but it's not about the having sex. I mean, as I said, I'm polyamorous. My partner has sex. I have one partner at the moment, but he has sex with multiple people. And I'm thrilled with that. It makes him really happy. And that in turn makes me happy. But it's all above board. It's all where everyone is aware and consenting. Other question or sort of response? I know we're almost out of time, but we have 9 minutes. So does anyone else want to talk about their group's view of misuse? Hakare.
Sorry, I actually wasn't raising my hand to talk about my group. Although we did have a good discussion. I just kind of wanted to pose a question to the group if anyone has any comments on it. I mean, our practice very much does revolve around suffering, ending suffering, not wanting to contribute to suffering. And when we talk about misuse of sexuality, we can point to things like cheating or using sexuality in ways that can cause suffering. What about our thoughts, though? Like in the verse of atonement, we say, all evil karma ever committed by me, says of old, born of my body, mouth, and thought. So where do things like sexual thoughts come into play with the Dharma in terms of the precepts and, in our practice?
What a great question. I get to go first because I'm running the workshop, but anyone else who wants to jump in afterwards, please do. I think what's important here is how much the thoughts hook you into any sort of following that thread. And by any sort, I don't mean that you necessarily go after this person, or if you have a, you just sort of keep dwelling on the thoughts. We've all sat in meditation and had our minds just go and go and go on something. I don't see this as significantly different than that. It's about letting go of those thoughts and letting them just sort of wash away and being present in the moment, rather than saying this is a special group of thoughts that are problematic because I'm imagining having sex with someone other than my partner, for example. Still just thoughts. Still just need to let them go. Anyone else like to comment on this question? Koku.
It's fine. I was the note taker for our group, which featured Hakare as well on Anshin. And we, similarly to Vin, we looked at the interrelationship between the sexual misconduct and the other precepts, because obviously there's clear interlinking with false speech, taking the not given, and generally people seem to prefer the ZMM precept with I think that was the one that talks about honoring the body, and that seemed important.
Mm-hmm.
And not just honoring one's own body, but honoring the body of others as well.
Yeah.
And as I'm not sure if Finn or you said, but although it's really good to have these precepts that do this, it seems impossible to exactly define where misconduct is, but that's not a bad thing. In the way in Zen, we went from kind of 400 or so precepts down to 16. And you're more trying to allow for curiosity and exploration within each moment and not having these just black-white.
Yeah.
So you can kind of feel into each moment to see, does this feel right? Does this not feel right? You've got some guidance, but there's never any explicit, we can set a boundary here.
Yeah.
Because as we know in relationships and even in sexual encounters, kind of consent can shift. So it's not even as if you can set something like that. And there was also the idea that of linking with the Soji one of not being greedy, that you can see how certain parts of your life kind of show up in other, that with oryoki, meaning just enough, the way you approach food is just to have just enough to nourish you, rather than just taking all the food that's on offer, all the food you can get. Then that seems to could then play out in other things like relationships and sex, of if you can maintain that kind of conduct of doing what's good and healthy for you, that would seem to play out elsewhere. So it's not just something which is limited to the sexual sphere, unrelated and unconnected to the rest of our life. It's something which is there in all our behavior and conduct. So there was more, but that's kind of the essence of what we came up with.
Thank you. Obviously, since I belong to Soji, I have a preference for greedy, but it is interesting to me what happens when you shift away from just misusing sexuality to defining it more specifically as greedy. I am very happy to hear from other groups. But because I know some people have to leave at 5:30, and I wanted to be able to get to this last point about, there it is. In my original insanity, I thought that I could cover way more things. So I have 5 other things I want to talk about. If people before they leave can just throw any numbers in, not that you like are coming, you are swearing to come to a workshop on this, but are any of these interesting to you? Is there something else you'd like a workshop that involves sexuality and Zen? What might that be? But if at the very least you can just throw a couple numbers into the chat before you leave, that would be really helpful to me. And while people are doing that, I will say that the rest of however long people want to hang out, whether it's 4 minutes or 30, I am very happy to answer any questions that people might have. I'm also very happy for people to contact me. I'll put my email, it's on the slides, but I'll put it in the chat. Oops, I will if I can type, then.
Rakugo will also share a follow-up email with everyone registered today, and we can include that information as well as a poll for these topics.
Okay, great. So, yeah, questions? Any questions or no questions? I will not be offended if no one asks questions. I've gotten to talk for 2 hours about my topic, so. Then, yes.
Yeah, if you can just explain, we can get the access of this recording in some way.
Yes, I'll let Keegan and explain that.
Yeah, I'm going to edit this recording, and we usually send the follow-up recording Monday or Tuesday of this week. You'll expect an email with the link, and you'll be free to share that with others as well. It will go on our YouTube channel.
Kim.
In my own personal work, I have discovered that anything that has to do with attachment dynamics is quite a bit more difficult for me to work with than other kinds of maybe more like addictions or and so I have suspected that this is one of the reasons why the tradition was historically very cautious about sexual energy, because of how it's related to attachment dynamics. Yeah, I just wondered if I would love to learn more about all of that and the relationship, and I see that in your topics to some degree about making it explicit. And I just thought I'd throw that out there for comment or.
So before I take a very complicated topic and squish it for time constraints, if you go online and search multiamory.com, I was on a podcast about non-traditional relationships and polyamory and such. It was multi instead of poly, but multiamory. And in that, actually did two, but my first presentation, basically what I was saying is that you can have much more, I believe, intimate, connected, honest relationships if you don't attach to the relationships. If you accept that all relationships end badly, right? Either you break up or somebody dies. So there's no getting out of a relationship in a positive way. So just accept that and focus instead on the middle. Focus on the coming together with another agenic, human being who has wants and needs that will sometimes overlap and sometimes differ from yours. And the difference doesn't need to be threatening. And the overlapping, connecting doesn't need to carry all of the weight of the relationship. And as I said, I spent 45 minutes talking about this, so I'll stop there. But yeah, I've thought a lot about how attachment, I'll just say one more thing, which is that normally when people open up a pre-existing monogamous relationship, it's very hard for a while. And when my husband told me that he thought he might be polyamorous, I was basically fine with it. And I had to sort of think about why this didn't bother me. And I realized it was all of the practice. And I was like, oh, I probably share this. Other questions? CoQ.
I'm still there. One thing, when you asked about giving talks, how many people have given talks or led discussions, one thing I said in the first breakout group is, normally I give a talk, probably when most of us give a talk, it's a mixture of personal experience and kind of text or whatever. And I've just felt a lack of knowledge of anything textual other than what you said, sort of early Buddhism, which is in no way sex positive, in order to feel I've even got the orientation within which, or the framework within which to give that kind of talk or to lead a discussion. So I was wondering if it's not too much work for you, if you might be able to, in any follow-up email, just give a few resources as regards sort of Zen and sex that we might be able to go to in order to just get some of that background, which I certainly didn't receive in my priest training. I don't know if anyone else did, but it seems like something which should really be there. And even if we get it late now, then yeah, it's not a bad thing. But yeah, I'd be really grateful for anything like that, any resources we could turn to.
Yeah, I have a few that I will certainly send, you, and I'll also give them to Keegan to share with anyone who wants them. I really want to build a much more comprehensive library of sources that people can use to engage with this topic. And I can certainly also, I would not at all mind having a class about the sort of human sexuality educator part that would help people feel more comfortable talking about sex in specifically Zen situations, because they'd have the sex stuff down. Adrian.
My question is similar. It's just about just your own personal opinion on some Zen centers on their website have like parameters for having relationships within the center. And I'm mostly talking with people like student to student. I'm not, and do you think that's a good idea to have that? And it can be helpful especially if you're new, but it can also be limiting because it doesn't cover everything in just those points. And if you do find one of those useful, what would you recommend? So basically, do you think that that's good to have? And if you do, which one have you seen that you thought was good?
I haven't seen a statement that I thought was particularly well placed. I think that obviously, I shouldn't say that. I believe very strongly, whether it's obvious or not, that there can never be a truly consensual relationship between a student and a teacher. And if there is a strong pull, then the student should work with someone else. In terms of student-to-student relationships, I think that's great. What they need, what people who develop relationships within the Sangha need to be able to do is to recognize that, how can I put this? The romantic or intimate or sexual or, other focused part of the relationship probably isn't very skillful in the Zendo. Like, just because that's a place for practicing other things. And not saying that you have to pretend you're strangers or anything, but letting the other person stand as just one individual member of the group, as opposed to singling them out in some way that feels special to the two of you.
Okay.
I need to think. Yeah, I think
I do see married couples practice together all the time. So
yeah.
There might be a difference in that, but I appreciate that in the Zendo, you could just be practitioner and just practicing on your own stuff.
Yeah.
So, thank you.
You're welcome. Thank you. Other questions? All right. Well, if there are no other questions right now, that's great. As I said, my email is in the chat somewhere. And please email me any questions or thoughts you have. I can never I love talking about the intersection of sexuality and other parts of life, especially Zen. I think it's really important, at least it is to me. So I'm so grateful to all of you for taking the time to do this very long workshop with me. So thank you.
Thank you, Rakugo. So in the chat, you'll see a link from Zena for a feedback form. This is our last event for the Actualizing and Sustaining Healthy Community series that we've worked on. That was generously funded by the Hemera Foundation. We hope you stay in touch. You're on our email list, and you'll hear about upcoming programs this year. This year, we are focusing a little bit on our members. We have an upcoming conference in September, so you'll see a reduced number of public programs from us this year, but we're still here and look forward to your feedback. And if you ever have a request for a program, I'd love to hear it. You can contact me at info@scba.org and let us know in that feedback form. So you'll receive an email from me early this week, or from Zena, with the link to this and follow-up resources. And thank you all for being here. We hope to see you again.
Keegan, all of these numbers that people very kindly put in the chat, are you capturing those?
I'll save the chat.
Thank you. Occurred to me. Oh, well, yeah.
Thank you. Feel free to unmute, but bye, everybody. This ends our program for the day.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye. Thank you.
Anything you need before we go, Rakugo? Let me